The universe of Arknights is one of the vastest ones I know. It genuinely feels like there's an endless amount of different scenarios that are available for exploration, ranging from political warfare all the way to the NFL. But my favorite among them deals with themes that seem incompatible with the vibe of the game, but for some reason they still manage to work. Let me show to you the cosmic horror of Arknights. The foundation of cosmic horror is a feeling of powerlessness in the face of something inconceivably vast and unknowable. Typically, the protagonists are just common people like you and me who have the misfortune of being faced with something that would put anyone out of their depth. Not just in cosmic horror, but pretty much every type of horror by necessity needs to induce a feeling of powerlessness. So how exactly is this achieved in a game where a pretty big portion of the character roster can single-handedly slay entire armies? The answer is to simply make the threat bigger, much bigger. In this video, I'll show you how this Plants vs Zombies looking ass game has some of the most interesting and terrifying cosmic horror concepts I've ever seen. It is no news that the Arknights roster is filled with some ridiculously powerful characters, both playable and not. We go from comparatively normal people who are just really cracked at fighting, all the way to fragments of living gods. And the funny thing is that some of the NPCs and bosses we face off against are even stronger than them. Back in my day, one of the hardest stages we had available was this one, WDEX8, where we face off against a boss enemy known as the Emperor's Blade, which is basically the elite of one of the nation's armies. And this motherfucker beats the ever-living shit out of your squad in gameplay, and in lore, even one of the strongest creatures Rhodes Island has access to is able to get him into a stalemate at most. This is Patriot, and in lore he can probably solo 3 or 4 Emperor's Blades, maybe even more. And both in canon and in gameplay, this guy is basically a living wall. It's really terrifying when you first go up against him because it doesn't really matter who you put in front of him, he can just one-shot them like it's nothing. And conversely, it feels like everything you throw at him barely makes a dent. Unless you're using Wilnar or some newer op, I don't know. My point is that this motherfucker is one of the most powerful things alive in the Arknights universe, and mind you that when you're fighting him, he is way past his prime, literally minutes away from dying from a disease. And yet, someone like Patriot feels unstoppable. There are many other characters that are equivalently powerful, and similarly there are a lot of elite units from each country that could single-handedly take down entire armies. The Witch King of Lithanian, the Apostolic Knights of Laterano, the Shadow Guard of Lungmen, some of these motherfuckers have more destructive power than a nuclear bomb. But keep this in mind, as this overpowered insanity only serves to amplify the cosmic horror that is to come. Every now and then, during anniversary events, Hyperglyph releases a short animation showing some of the different nations of Terra. They are all narrated by Dr. Kautsit, and in it she gives a brief overview of what each country does, what they're known about, etc. It just so happens that in the most recent one of these videos, Discover Terra 3.0, the broadcast is interrupted by a nation we have yet to see in-game, Aegir, located entirely beneath the ocean. In this broadcast, Aegir asks for all the nations to put their differences aside and unite in the name of defeating an enemy much bigger than anything they've seen before. Bigger than Catastrophes, bigger than Originium, bigger than the two of them combined even. It is an enemy capable of overwhelming the entire world of Terra by their sheer number alone. Creatures that dwell in the crushing depths of the abyssopelagic zone. They have been down there, multiplying in those Stygian waters since the dawn of humankind, and they are likely to keep doing that well after the stars have expired, assuming they aren't the very cause of that event in the first place. I am, of course, talking about the Seaborn. Precious little is known of the Seaborn, as the very name encapsulates a very wide variety of creatures, ranging from microscopic colonies all the way to gargantuan leviathans roaming the dark oceans of Terra. Even in lore, they are particularly hard to research since if they're captured, their body just dissolves into a bunch of muscle fibers that keep respirating, precisely so that no one gets a chance to research them in any way. It's like they know that. The little we do know about them only brings forth more questions, as their behavior is incredibly simple, yet very alien. The goal of the Seaborn, much like that of any other creature lacking higher levels of reasoning, is very simple: survive and multiply at any cost. The way they differ from other creatures is in their collective cooperative behavior, since every single Seaborn, from the microscopic to the Leviathan, all act as a single entity. They are controlled by a hive mind called the Many, or We Many if you're one of them. Whether this is an actual higher consciousness shared between all the Seaborn or just some very sophisticated emergent behavior is unclear. What is clear is that for all intents and purposes, every Seaborn you see is a part of the same creature. Though some of the most evolved Seaborn seem to possess some sense of individuality, from their point of view they are all a part of the same whole, and that gives them a pretty big leg up in comparison to the people of Terra. While the other nations are busy with their petty squabble, killing each other over political contrivances, the Seaborn are working as a single unit. There are no fights or disagreements between them, for the same reason why your left hand doesn't fight or disagree with your right hand. They are always working in unison to achieve the same goal. Not even things like starvation ever produce a fight within the Seaborn, as food simply goes to the Seaborn considered to be the priority, and that's it. There's even an entire type of Seaborn known as the Nether Seabrand that has as one of their many functions serving as nutrition for the more evolved Seaborn. But being the quote-unquote lowest tier of Seaborn doesn't make the Nether Seabrand any less terrifying, as it is capable of spreading and covering entire towns in a matter of days, if not hours. But it does more than making land more suitable for the Seaborn, as the brand is extremely noxious to any land-dwelling creature. In gameplay, it causes nervous impairment, causing operators affected by it to receive 100 true damage and stuns them for a bit. Bringing this to less gamey terms, coming into contact with the Nether Seabrand makes your nervous system stop working. If something like that were to exist in the real world, it would undoubtedly be one of the most dangerous and tightly regulated substances in the world. But in Arknights, this is a living creature capable of covering entire settlements in a matter of hours. And the thing is that the Nether Seabrand is probably the least of your worries. There are also other types of Seaborn that you need to deal with. The brand simply make it so that a certain zone is more suitable for their presence. Speaking of which, let's talk about the other ones. The Seaborn are probably the most adaptable life form of Terra, as one of their properties is being able to evolve really quickly. Usually it takes a species thousands of generations to noticeably evolve. The modern human, for example, has been around for about 300,000 years, which would roughly equate to 10,000 generations, assuming it takes an average of 30 years per generation. If you select an average human from now and an average human from then, anatomically and physiologically, they would be pretty similar to one another. Evolution works faster in creatures with a faster generational cycle, hence why flies are often used for long-term genetic studies where you can have like 12 generations per year. The Seaborn, on the other hand, evolve so fast that sometimes evolutionary cycles can happen in one single individual in the time that it takes for them to walk from one end of the room to another. This is the case for the boss of Stultifera Navis, which goes through 4 different forms in rapid succession. Imagine a creature like that, which is constantly changing shape and morphology as it's walking towards you, each iteration a better and more adaptable way of getting rid of you. This alone is already pretty terrifying, but there's more. The Seaborn also have the capacity of partially or completely assimilating other living creatures, as we see with Alfonso, the captain of the Stultifera Navis. He's had part of his body completely assimilated by the Seaborn, acting of his own accord. But even so, he's doing a lot better than his first mate, Garcia, who has been completely assimilated to the point of not even being able to speak anymore. But this assimilation can occur in a number of different ways, as there's an entire faction of playable operators known as the Abyssal Hunters that all have Seaborn blood running in their veins. They are super soldiers created by the nation of Aegir in an attempt to neutralize the Seaborn threat, except for Andriana, who just likes to hang out with them apparently. Though the Seaborn blood does make these operators superhumanly powerful even for the standards of the Arknights universe, they still suffer from the consequences of Seaborn assimilation. An example would be Gladia, who appears to be presenting the first symptoms of assimilation by the end of the Undertides event. It is not known how long this process takes, nor whether it can be staved off, but the truth is that all Abyssal Hunters are destined to become Seaborn eventually. Even the actual Seaborn recognize this fact, as they consider the Abyssal Hunters as their kin and harbor no ill will towards them, despite being an entire cast of soldiers dedicated to the slaughter of their kind. But there is one person who is at the center of this conflict, one of Rhodes Island's most powerful operators, Skaji. She's one of the Abyssal Hunters, more specifically the one responsible for killing one of the Seaborn gods, a leviathan known as Ishar-Mla, the Corrupting Heart. It is said that in the moment that Skaji dealt the coup de grace to the leviathan, their blood fused together and Ishar-Mla's consciousness migrated to Skaji's body, where it remains dormant. But in a non-canon timelines, there are scenarios in which Skaji's mind is overcome with Ishar-Mla's influence, and if that happens, we get to witness what would happen as a consequence. Over 60 years before the events of the main story, the southeastern nation of Iberia suffered with one of the greatest catastrophes ever seen on Terra, known as the Great Silence. Iberia had been enjoying a golden age up until the moment where they suffered with a massive seaborne invasion, quickly followed by a country-ending tsunami that annihilated their entire coastal infrastructure. All the lighthouses, ports, and settlements built over decades gone within days. Being a nation built from their maritime prowess, the Iberians have yet to recover from this catastrophe, such was the damage. Though they blamed the nation of Aegir for this event, even going as far as to prosecute some Aegirians living in Iberia, the truth is that this event was caused by the Seaborn. The Aegirians themselves have their culture, technology, and infrastructure entirely dedicated to fending off the Seaborn. There are multiple instances when the Aegir are said to be more technologically advanced than the nations of Terra, and yet they are still struggling to contain the Seaborn threat. To be able to send an entire nation back to the Dark Ages after just one single attack already denotes how much of a threat the Seaborn truly are. However, one of the scenarios that we explore in gameplay is the Second Silence, and it is much greater than the one that washed upon Iberia. It will come to fruition should Ishar-Mla's consciousness awaken in Skaji. This is what Aegir was warning the other nations about all the way in Discover Terra 3.0. An emergency broadcast pleading with the other nations to put their differences aside and unite against a greater enemy. However, in this scenario, it doesn't really matter whether they reach any consensus, as the Seaborn proved too overwhelming for the combined might of all the countries of Terra. I opened this video talking about how the world of Arknights has some incredibly powerful characters. From the elite soldiers like the Emperor's Guards, to incredibly skilled combatants like Chen or Lapland, to even genuine walk-in legends like Patriot. And it doesn't stop at that. Imagine the combined power of all the nations of Terra, the cannons of Londinium, the weapons of mass destruction from Colombia, the living gods of Lungmen, even the entire Sarka's army. Every single one of them falls to the second silence. The Seaborn are simply too numerous, too overwhelming. The grandest cathedral in Laterano, the tallest mountain of Kijerag, the biggest skyscraper in Lungmen, all unceremoniously swallowed by the Great Wave, covered in the Nether-Sea brand. Whatever survived will either perish to the Seaborn or join them through assimilation. And I think this scenario is the perfect encapsulation of cosmic horror in Arknights. To think that even seemingly unstoppable forces fall in the presence of something so overwhelming. The horror works best when whoever is experiencing it is forcibly put in a situation of powerlessness. This goes doubly so for cosmic horror, but the approach taken by Arknights is not to take away the power from the characters, but to simply make the threat they're facing unfathomably big. Consider Skaji, who's technically the protagonist of all these stories involving the Abyssal Hunters and the Seaborn. Let me read a few excerpts from her files. Skaji excels in fighting large masses of enemies, but also tends to cause excessive property damage. This includes wrecked buildings, mangled fences, and once collapsing an entire fort. Mind you that the only weapon she uses is a greatsword. This is our protagonist, and even though she's insanely strong, both Gladia and Opianos are shown to be more powerful than her. Considering this, and all the other unbelievably powerful people of Terra, just how overwhelming must the Seaborn be to be able to destroy the entire planet? In the second ending of Integrated Strategies 3, Mizuki and the Kailua Arbor, the entire planet has succumbed to the oceanic apocalypse, with the Doctor being the only survival. The entire world fell to the Seaborn under the leadership of Ishar Mla piloting Scotty's body. We don't really get to see too much of what this apocalypse would look like, but before ending the video, I'd like to invite you to go check out a comic by Xero on Pixiv that illustrates what became of the Doctor in the first 30 days after the Second Silence. I'll leave both the link to it, as well as one really good comic that I found in the description. Arknights is not a horror game, as you can probably tell by the gameplay, but it generally has some of the most varied and interesting lore of any game I've ever seen. If you're watching this, odds are that you probably already saw my previous video on Arknights I made almost a year ago. This cosmic horror story is just one of the many scenarios the game explores. Inevitably, when the new Abyssal Hunter event drops, there's a good chance that the information in this video will need a bit of revision, things to add, corrections, etc. Should this happen, I'm thinking of making a whole-ass documentary of the entire lore of Arknights, including the Seaborn. Something Vadi Vidya styled, if you know him. But that is a problem for future me. I know that he's talking shit about the present me, so I'm going out of my way to make his life harder. Hopefully by then, he will have had the time to mourn his wallet. Wait, if you watched to this part, you are probably an OG, so I have an announcement to make. I am in the process of making a Discord server for the community, and sometime in the next week I will post a video that will contain an invite that lasts for 24 hours. I'm doing it this way because I only ever use Discord to play with the boys and I have no experience managing a server whatsoever. I'm gonna let a few people in to test the waters, and in the future, after I have a mod or two, I'm going to open it to more people. So yeah, if you're interested, keep an eye out for that. But if you're not, good, because I don't really want too many people in this first batch. But yeah, see you later, bros.